Golly is the peg-leg poet in the comic strip BC. He writes a poem entitled, "I'll Take Heaven." The strip shows him leaning up against a tree as the words appear frame from frame. Man, man, magnificent man, creates forces that outshine the stars. He can shoot himself up and tap dance on the moon or hurl himself clear out to Mars. He can unleash a force that evaporates steel since he's learned how an atom behaves. Yet he has no recourse but to bow to the force that calls the dead from their graves. A preacher was preaching a funeral service, and his focus was on the second coming of Christ and the resurrection from the dead. He preached and he preached and he preached, and he couldn't seem to find a stopping point, Tim. We've never had that happen here, I'm sure. But the funeral director grew concerned about the time, and he stepped over to one of the church members and says, "Does your pastor speak this long at funerals?" And the member said, "Isn't this a marvelous sermon?" So the funeral director sheepishly stepped away, and then he looked at his watch again in a little bit, and he walked back over, and the member said, "Do you not believe in the resurrection from the dead and the second coming of Christ?" And the funeral director answered, "I do, but I think we need to get this man buried before Christ returns." Children's sermons are very special moments because you really never know what the children are going to say. A pastor sat with a gathered group of children. He talked to the kids about being good and about going to heaven. And at the end of his talk, the pastor said, "So where do you want to go?" And all of the children said in unison, "Heaven." And then he said, "And what must you be to get to heaven?" And they said, "Dead." That's usually the point in the children's sermon, that the pastor turns and has a prayer with the kids and sends them back to awakening to worship. This summer, we've looked at some of the classic texts in the Bible. Today, we turn to the final judgment found in Revelation 20 and 21. Next week, we look at the Great Commission of Christ in Matthew 28. And then the last three of those Sundays, you have selected the texts upon which I will preach. And I'll print those in next Sunday's bulletin so that you'll know which ones to read ahead of time. The Apostle John had a vision while banished to the Isle of Patmos. We call this the book of the Revelation to John. It's the final book of the Bible. Some interpret the book of Revelation literally. I do not. Some dismiss this revelation as the fantasy journal of a delirious disciple imprisoned in the scorching Mediterranean heat. I don't think it is fantasy. I believe that the book of Revelation is a series of visions recorded by John that symbolize the cosmic battle between good and evil. In fact, the visions are 7 in number, and they are increasingly intense from the first vision through the midpoint of the 6th. It's really unclear whether good or evil, God or Satan, are going to win. In the text for today, the decision has been made and the final judgment has begun. In Y2K, 16 years ago, many Christians were reading the Left Behind series by LaHaye and Jenkins. I found the books a fascinating read, but theologian Reinhold Niebuhr once said, "It is unwise for Christians to claim any knowledge of either the furniture of heaven or the temperature of hell." It is unwise for us to declare any knowledge of either the furniture of heaven or the temperature of hell. He went on to say that it is wise to accept the testimony of the heart. And I don't know about you, but when Gene read those words from Daniel and when we read the words from Revelation, they're very, very similar. My heart testifies to their truth. I believe in the resurrection of the dead. I believe that there will be a final judgment of all who have died and those who are living and are taken up to heaven on the last day. I believe we will all stand before the great white throne, much like the throne that the prophet Daniel saw. I believe each one of us will be judged not by our church membership or the family or nation or religion into which we were born. But we will be judged by what we have done. I do not know the answer as to what God is going to do with faithful Buddhists and faithful Jews and faithful Muslims and faithful Hindus. My daughter may marry a Hindu within this next year. I never thought when I went to seminary that I was going to have a son-in-law who might be Hindu. But I am so excited. And I just can't wait for God to just teach me through that. It's not my call, but I do know that this scripture text says that we will be judged by what we have done. Verse 12 says that we're judged according to our works. Verse 13 says that all are judged by what we have done. Now, we talked about this between services, and I believe that it is when you have faith that you indeed do those good works. Faith without works, though, is dead, according to the epistle from James. So our names are recorded in the book of life based solely on what we have done during our lives. This echoes Matthew 25, where the goats are separated from the sheep based on what they have done for the hungry and the thirsty and the stranger and the naked and the sick and those who are in prison. When the book of life is opened and all are standing before the throne, death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. This is the fire of annihilation, which I actually embrace as one of the marvelous examples of the grace of God. Why? Because rather than have unbelieving souls, evil souls, burning for eternity in a hell or living for eternity in separation from God, God simply and graciously annihilates those souls. I wrote about that in seminary, and I thought I was going to get an F, but the professor said, "Pressed thin as a dime, that's where I stand as well." God knows, not me. But in chapter 20, it concludes with God's grace, I believe, towards those who do not believe. And chapter 21 then begins with this vision of the new heaven and new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. Passing away here does not mean that heaven and earth will be totally annihilated by what one modern-day quacky prophet calls a quadrillion megaton explosion. This would break God's promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17. God said, "I will give to you and to your descendants and after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession." And then in Hebrews 11, Abraham is looking forward to, quote, "the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God." To annihilate the earth and heaven in a quadrillion megaton explosion would be breaking God's everlasting promise to humanity. The Greek language really helps us here. John, as he records his vision, uses the word kainos instead of the word neos when he speaks of the new heaven and the new earth. Neos means totally new, almost out of nothing, making something new. Kainos is taking what exists and transforming it. The actual Greek word in there is metamorphosis. I don't know that you've ever heard that word before, but no, I know you have. That's the Greek word, the metamorphose. That change that occurs is not something totally new created out of nothing, like the old is wiped out. John uses the word kainos, which means renewed, new in nature and quality. Heaven and earth are renewed, transformed. The best is made even better. And the old passes away. Literally, this means it loses its force. It becomes invalid. One writer described it with these words: "The world into which we shall enter in the second coming of Christ is therefore not another world. It is this world, this heaven, this earth. Both, however, passed away and renewed. It is these forests, these fields, these cities, these streets, these people that will be the scene of redemption. At present, they are battlefields full of the strife and sorrow of the not yet accomplished consummation. Then they will be fields of victory, fields of harvest, where out of the seed that was sown with tears, the everlasting sheaves will be reaped and brought home." You know, what a day that will be. We don't know when that's going to happen. I've often thought, what if 10,000 years from now There are still Christians, and Christ has not returned yet. And we at Grace Covenant in 2016 are called the early Christians, Mary. That we are, that group of early Christians that were there in Kansas, a place in the middle of the United States. And we're sitting there thinking, wow, we don't know. If Christ returns tonight, we need to be ready. If Christ returns in 10,000 years, we need to be ready. But what a day that will be. God promises the end to sorrow and tears in this text. God promises that there shall be no more funerals or saying goodbye to those whom we love. God promises no more crying or pain or cancer or heart attacks, no more chemotherapy or EKGs or fatal accidents, no more suicide bombers or starving children or nightclub shooters or homeless persons, no more abuse of women or children or older adults, no more drugs or alcoholism or human trafficking, no more, no more. What a day that will be. What a day that will be. Until that day, we have to live every day for Christ, making sure that everything we do honors God. What we do is being recorded in the book of life, and it will have eternal significance for each of us on that last day. What is written on each of our pages in that book of life? The story is told of a man who lived a safe life. He decided not to love too much because love was costly. He decided not to dream too much because dreaming only brought disappointment. He decided not to serve too much because serving got your hands filthy and could get you into trouble. And so when the man died, he presented his life to God, undiminished, unmarred, unsoiled by the messiness of a fallen world. And he proudly said, God, here is my life. And God responded, life? What life? Sisters and brothers, what kind of day will that final day be for us? Serve others through Christ now, and it will be a great day.